The Adventures of Captain Underpants, an epic novel by Pilkey. Chapter 1. George and Harold. Meet George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. George and Harold were best friends. They had a lot in common. They lived right next door to each other, and they were both in the same 4th grade class at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. George and Harold were usually responsible kids. Whenever anything bad happened, George and Harold were usually responsible. But don't get the wrong idea about these two. George and Harold were actually very nice boys. No matter what everybody else thought, they were good, sweet, and lovable. Well, okay. Maybe they weren't so sweet and lovable, but they were good nonetheless. It's just that George and Harold each had a silly streak a kilometre long. Usually that silly streak was hard to control. Sometimes it got them into trouble, and once it got them into big, big trouble. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. Treehouse Comics, Inc. After a hard day of cracking jokes, pulling pranks and causing mayhem at school, George and Harold liked to rush to the old treehouse in George's backyard. Inside the treehouse were 2 big old fluffy chairs, a table, a cupboard crammed with junk food, and a padlock crate filled with pencils, pens, and stacks of paper. Now Harold loved to draw and George loved to make up stories, and together the 2 boys spent hours and hours writing and drawing their very own comic books. Over the years they had created hundreds of their own comics starring dozens of their own superheroes. First there was Dog Lady, then came Timmy the Talking Toilet, and who could forget the amazing Cow Lady? But the all-time greatest superhero they ever made up had to be the amazing Captain Underpants. George came up with the idea. Most superheroes look like they're flying around in their underwear, he said. Well, this guy actually is flying around in his underwear. The 2 boys laughed and laughed. Yeah, said Harold, he could fight with wedgie power. George and Harold spent entire afternoons writing and drawing the comic adventures of Captain Underpants. He was the coolest superhero ever. Luckily for the boys, the secretary of Jerome Horwitz Elementary School was much too busy to keep an eye on the photocopier. So whenever they got a chance, Harold and George would sneak into the office and run off several hundred copies of their latest Captain Underpants adventure. After school, they sold their homemade comics on the playground for 50 cents each. Chapter 3. The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Written by George Beard, cartoons by Harold Hutchins. The Really Cool Adventures of Captain Underpants, written by George Beard, drawn by Harold Hutchins. It was a time of darkness and despair for planet Earth. Bad guys had taken over the streets, and all of the superheroes in the world were too old to fight evil. Hey! Ha-ha! Then along came a new improved, extra-strength superhero. Tra-la-la! Look up in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's an egg salad sandwich! No way! I'm Captain Underpants! Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding waistband, more powerful than boxer shorts, and able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie. Tra-la-la! Day and night, Captain Underpants watched over the city, fighting for the truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony. Meanwhile, at a nearby elementary school, it was Stinky Taco Surprise Day at the cafeteria. Yuck! Everybody hated it so much they all threw it away. Soon the cafeteria food came to life. I am the inedible hunk. The monster ran around the school eating everything in sight. Munch, munch. Help! The inedible hunk just ate up 15 chairs and the gym teacher. Oh no! Not the folding chairs! This looks like a job for Captain Underpants! Tra-la-la! Captain Underpants shot lots of underwear at the monster, but it didn't do any good. Zip, zip, munch, 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 munch. So Captain Underpants took off running. The inedible hunk chased him. Grrr! Help! And chased him. And chased him. Finally, the inedible hunk got too tired and thirsty to chase Captain Underpants. How about a nice drink of water? So the monster took a long drink from a shiny white bowl. When suddenly, hooray for Captain Underpants! And so the inedible hunk got flushed away and was never heard from again. Tra-la-la! The end. Don't miss our next exciting adventure, Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets, coming soon to a playground near you. Chapter 4. Mean Old Mr. Krupp. Do you see that old guy looking out of the window up there? That's Mr. Krupp, the principal. Now Mr. Krupp was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sound of children playing at break. In fact, he hated children altogether. And guess which two children Mr. Krupp hated most of all? If you guessed George and Harold, you're right. Mr. Krupp hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wise cracks. He hated their silly attitudes and their constant giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Krupp vowed. One day, very, very soon. And that's it for today. Next time we'll begin with Chapter 5.